Our first speaker for today's session on Research Update, Ted Trahan, who is a member of the OIF Board of Directors. Ted, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Michael. Welcome to the 2022 Virtual National Conference. I am Ted Trahan, and I'm serving as President for the OI Foundation Board of Directors. This virtual conference is the in-person conference that almost was. Last winter, the nation was entering the peak of the Omicron variant of COVID. At that time, it was impossible to foresee what COVID was going to look like now in July of 2022. With uncertainty over both the state of the virus and the conditions under which OI community members would be willing to attend, the very difficult decision was made to make this conference virtual. The next decision, however, was not so difficult. The next decision was to immediately follow the virtual conference with an in-person regional conference. Regional conferences allow us to be more nimble with conference participation and logistics. Stay tuned for more on that during the closing session this afternoon. We are able to gather online today with friends and fellow members of the OI community because our speakers have invested themselves in sharing their knowledge and experience. And the OI staff have diligently pulled together both relationships and logistics to make it possible. So here's a huge shout out to the staff and our presenters, and of course our sponsors for making this possible today. And also, what would a conference be without participants? So also a shout out to each of you dialing into Zoom today on a Saturday to educate yourself on OI and to connect or reconnect with friends. Moving on to the topic of this session, research. 2 decades ago, bisphosphonates became the standard of care for children with OI. Prior to that, the first 4 types of OI were identified, along with methods of diagnosis and understanding of how bone is built and remodeled. Since that time, there has been tremendous growth in the understanding of not only a fuller range of OI types and signaling between cells involved with bone formation, but also greater understanding of quality of life factors such as pregnancy and OI, respiratory factors, dental consequences, new drug therapies and physical therapies, pediatric to adult transitions, and mental health. How is it that we are in this period of greatly expanding knowledge directly affecting quality of life in people with OI and family or caregivers of people with OI? The answer, in part, is that there are people out there with a curiosity to ask penetrating questions about how people work, what makes us tick. These people, our colleagues in research, are driving this growth in knowledge and in turn growing the guidance of navigating lives with OI. For this reason, I am grateful to introduce the research portion of the conference today. Our first speaker is Professor and Chairman of the Department of Molecular and Human Genetics at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas. He discovered mutations in post-translational collagen modification genes as causes of osteogenesis imperfecta. He also identified that increased TGF-beta signaling is a common driver in OI, a discovery that is now being tested in clinical studies by the NIH Brittle Bones Disorders Consortium, or BBDC. Please welcome Dr. Brendan Lee.
Dr. Lee, I want to interrupt real quick. We're not seeing your slides yet. Exactly.
Words about sort of gene editing, which is an exciting sort of development in the past few years. As Ted mentioned, I think OI Foundation has always been at the leading edge of driving research, and research is so critical because it is how we transform lives and medical care in any disease, and certainly in rare diseases. And the OI Foundation has been really a key in driving and nucleating and bringing researchers and families together in this critical mission. This has been, yes.
I'm sorry, I have one more audio visual question for you. If you go to your interpretation panel, have you selected English as your language? This is on the bottom of, I think it should be like under the more thing while you are sharing your screen.
Okay, interpretation, English. Yes, is that
Great.
good?
Thank you. I think it will help us.
Have I been speaking in Spanish up to now?
Oh, no. So as we record this in English, I believe it impacts the quality of the recording, which will post later online.
Okay, is that
so
okay
much.
now? Sorry.
I believe so. Thank you.
Okay, so as I was saying, if you look at the past really 50 plus years, 52 years of research in OI, and this is one metric that I like to use to guide the sort of cumulative activity. It's not perfect, but I think it's a good sort of marker. The number of scientific publications in the peer-reviewed literature pulled from something called PubMed over this 5-decade of time. And there's some landmarks that I think Ted alluded to. In 1985, the gene that causes the most common form of OI, type 1 collagen, was identified as the cause. Subsequently, in 1998, Francis Glorier published a landmark paper showing that, in fact, bisphosphonates could be used in children with OI. We, over now close to 20 years ago, published a group of proteins and genes which cause recessive forms of OI, and then many other investigators have since described new and additional forms of OI that I think many of you are familiar with. And you can see that over this first sort of 30 years, it's been a steady increase reflective of the work that we all were doing. But I think the OI Foundation especially made another important investment, which was to form and bring folks together to pursue clinical research, in addition to the basic research that has been the foundation of our knowledge base in OI. And this was with the formation of the Link Clinical Research Centers. That then led directly to the formation of the Brittle Bone Disorders Consortium, which I will describe briefly. And as you can see, there has been a steep increase in terms of the activity and the publications around OI, especially around clinical issues. And this is not so different than our experience as a country and a world with COVID. The COVID vaccine, the clinical information that we've gotten in the past 2.5 years has been astounding, but that was built on 20 years of basic research, of steady, productive basic research. And I think, again, our experience in our sort of rare disease part of the world of osteogenesis imperfecta reflects this, and it has been driven, I think, in no small part by the OI Foundation. It's exciting. In 2021, there were close to 300 publications just on the topic of osteogenesis imperfecta. And this year alone, in 2022, we're halfway through the year and we're close to 160. So I think it really reflects so much is going on. In spite of this, of course, there's lots to learn. And this is part of why the NIH and the OI Foundation work together to support the Brittle Bone Disorders Consortium. And these are many clinical sites around North America, of which hopefully some of you are partners as participants in our studies that really strive to translate some of the basic findings we have in the lab over all these years and work together to learn from you as in terms of some of the clinical issues in OI to try to answer questions and drive new questions, and ultimately move towards what we call clinical trial readiness, which is to set a foundation where new clinical trials can test treatments of different kinds, not just drug treatments. Now, the goals over the first 10 years of this study has been at the core, a natural history study, which now currently has enrolled close to 960 individuals with OI, both children and adults, and that's amazing. This is the largest clinical research study in osteogenesis imperfecta in the world. Individuals here will be followed and are being followed continuously. Important questions include, well, how do we determine severity of the disease with the underlying gene mutation? How do we manage and what is the course of scoliosis in severe forms of OI? How do we deal with the vertebral compression fractures in mild forms of type 1 OI, in all aspects of oral and dental health? And this still to this day is a core study where we're continuing to track patients and obtain clinical information to both answer some of these questions, but drive new questions. We recently finished another important study that was started in the first cycle of the grant that Ted alluded to, and that was to translate, again, basic findings in the lab that a protein called TGF-beta is increased in many forms of OI, and whether we can use it as a therapeutic approach using antibodies to block it. And I'll touch on some of those results. A very exciting project that is just launched, literally in the past few weeks, is an interventional trial using plastic aligners to try to treat a very problematic problem in severe OI, which is dental or tooth malocclusion. And this can impact quality of life, your ability to chew and eat. And so you can imagine this I think will be a very, very important interventional study. And there are many other pilot, ancillary, or supplemental studies where leveraging this enormous cohort, we can begin to ask questions about biomarkers. Can we find measurements in the blood and other tissues that can tell us about the disease? Can we determine tools that help to measure quality of life so that that can be used as an endpoint during clinical trials? Craniofacial development, pregnancy, very recently, very excitingly, the first year of a study around pain and anxiety and well-being, and of course, cardiovascular complications. Another important component has been career enhancement and education of you, our patient partners, providers, healthcare providers, researchers, and young trainees of all types, because we need to build our future pipeline. As you know, one day I will retire, and many of us will need a next generation of researchers. And then, of course, a large contact registry that the OIF has led to really keep over 3,000 individuals in communication with all this research and other activities. So I'm not going to go through all the things up to this past year that we've learned. What I would say is the first phase of all this data that we've accumulated together with you has been to look at cross-sectional analysis. And what that means is when each of you participate in the BBDC, we get a lot of baseline information. And so what we're doing in many of the reports that are now in the literature from these studies is to talk about your experience at baseline as a group. We're not yet reporting on what we call longitudinal study, which is going to be the real powerful aspect of the data, which is what happens to you over time individually. But even using cross-sectional data, we touched on cesarean section delivery in patients with OI. We've touched on effects of bisphosphonates on bone, oral quality of health in children and adolescents, dental and craniofacial features of different types of OI, using new technologies to, like cone beam computed tomography to really quantify the effects on the craniofacial features and airways, dental and facial characteristics, again, of different types of OI, important issues like dental caries in oral health of individuals with OI. As a group, growth characteristics across all individuals with OI in different severity, baseline pulmonary function, again, baseline, not necessarily over your lifespan. What are your perspectives in the context of rare bone disease and how we can incorporate your perspectives in different studies? What is the mobility of individuals with OI of different types, as well as what are the types of experiences that you can report in terms of accurately and quantifying measures in terms of quality of life that could be used in clinical trials. And I listed many of these publications in the different aspects of this. Whoop, sorry. So importantly, the OIF has also taken a lead in terms of communicating some of these findings. And as you know, there's been a series of BBDC updates. I've done them. Other investigators like Dr. Krakow, Retrouvé, Storch, and others have done podcasts, so to speak, or the video cast, which you can then have as a resource in case you're not able necessarily to find those papers or read those papers. So I encourage you to stay tuned and follow on this sort of channel for updates from the BBDC. Now, what have we learned since 2000, this period in the past year, 2021 to 22? We've continued to publish, and for example, there's a recent publication in May of last year focusing on missing and unerupted teeth in osteogenesis imperfecta. So again, we appreciate how the dental aspects of the condition can so much impact quality of life. And really, the first step is to describe in great detail the type of problems that are present, and then we can build on how to design trials in the future that focus on intervention. This is something we just finished, and we're very excited about, where we, together with you, published our sort of translational study of targeting this protein called TGF-beta in the treatment of OI. It just came out in April of 2022, and I'll touch on some of the results. Dr. Orwell worked on many samples that you have provided and began to look at a biomarker potentially for growth in osteogenesis imperfecta. As many of you live in your everyday life, growth, stature, height is also an important element of many forms of OI, and we are beginning to understand what may actually impact growth and eventually, hopefully, modulate or improve growth in OI. There are other projects where there are now papers that have been submitted or in preparation, quantifying the facial morphology of individuals with OIs type 1, 3, and 4 using different types of computer tools. And this is a very important element of a theme. We learn from you and by seeing patients, sort of the problems that patients may have. But as a group, we have to quantify. We have to be able to measure carefully, because to develop treatments, the FDA requires us to be able to show that we're having an impact. And this type of research is key for what we call clinical trial readiness, so that in fact, we, as well as industry and companies and other researchers, can use the data to actually plan clinical trials. This is a really exciting sort of, again, foundational study looking at pain in osteogenesis imperfecta. This is a major element of some of patients with OI, and certainly I think we'll be increasingly focused on in the future. And then again, another paper that's in preparation on pulmonary function and scoliosis. So one of the major projects that came out of the BBDC has been this Fresolumab study, which is based on a lot of work that we've done in cells and mice, as well as now validated by many other researchers. We tested this drug called Fresolumab, which is an antibody, something that blocks TGF-beta. So if TGF-beta is high, can we reduce it in patients, and is there potentially a beneficial effect or maybe a negative effect, which is why most clinical trials have to start with what we call phase 1 studies. And as you can see, in this study, and we work closely with our orthopedic surgeons at Baylor, but also with Dr. Megan Wallace at Omaha as part of the BBDC, we found that there was dramatic increase in TGF-beta also in a bone from individuals from OI. These are bone samples with OI bone individuals in the bottom 2 rows and control individuals in the top row. And the brown staining is in fact a marker of this protein TGF-beta and activity. And so you can see dramatically there's this increase. And what we found is that using 2 doses, a 1 milligram per kilo dose and a 4 milligram per kilo dose, we saw, especially in OI type 4 patients, pretty significant increases even after a single dose of the antibody. So up to, for example, 8 or 9% increase in lumbar spine bone mineral density. And But however, we did see less of an effect in the more severe patients. For example, in OI type 8 patient, and in OI type 3 patient, we even saw a decrease in the bone density, though this was somewhat problematic because the patients had fractures and then were immobile, and that there were some issues with, again, measuring the bone mineral density. Irrespective, I would say, what these initial data suggested to us is that first, there were no significant adverse event that could impact its use. There seemed to be some dramatic increases in certainly some individuals, especially with OI type 4, but it didn't have the same effects in some of the more severe OIs like OI type 3. And so in fact, one of the goals of the BBDC is to do the formative studies, which can then empower drug companies to pursue clinical development, because ultimately we depend on our partners in industry to actually get drugs to patients. We in the research world, the NIH and the OIF, can do the foundational studies to inform these investments. And in fact, Sanofi has just started their POISE-1 study. And this is a phase 1 single dose study using a new anti-TGF-beta antibody, which they are now recruiting in multiple countries. And this is the clinicaltrial.gov number if you want to read more about it. And they're trying to enroll about 24 participants. And then they're basically, again, looking at safety, how the drug works in the body, and bone mineral density with a single dose. It's very similar to what we did in that initial pilot study. And they're focusing primarily on OI type 4 and OI type 1 adults in this study. So very exciting that, in fact, that is being moved forward. Now, another very exciting sort of development that's going on has been the work of another company, Mereo and Ultragenyx, where they have built on really a long history of, again, research by multiple investigators, both inside the BBDC and outside the BBDC, targeting another key protein called Wnt signaling. And Wnt signaling is very complex, and I just show it on the left. I'm not going to go through all this, but the key important take-home message is that there's lots of human genetic evidence that show that Wnt is key for driving bone formation. And that when you study OI mouse models, when you increase Wnt signaling, you can increase the amount of bone. And in fact, one of the ways to effectively increase Wnt signaling is to block a protein called sclerostin, which is shown here. And sclerostin is actually an inhibitor of Wnt signaling. So this prevents this complex from forming, which activates Wnt signaling. And basically what these companies are doing is testing an antibody, just like the study on TGF-beta, to block sclerostin, thereby releasing its inhibition to activate more Wnt. And in fact, Francis Gloria and others did a phase 2 study looking at safety and early efficacy with an anti-sclerostin antibody in adults with moderate osteogenesis imperfecta. And again, there were very encouraging results there. And so I think that that is now a second drug trial in terms of really trying to develop a therapy specifically for OI. Remember, up to now, in spite of all the great science, we still don't have an FDA-approved treatment for OI. Bisphosphonates, while incredibly effective, is not FDA-approved for this treatment. And so this is sort of exciting that with all the work we've done together, there are now 2 drug consortia or companies pursuing actually treatment specifically for OI. And so really, when you think about drug treatments, this is sort of the landscape. We have bone forming cells, osteoblasts, bone resorbing cells, osteoclasts, and they're major proteins that regulate this process. So we've targeted TGF-beta, which is a protein that's important in coupling and communicating between these 2 cells. Sclerostin, which is an inhibitor of Wnt signaling, which drives primarily osteoblast bone formation. And the 2 different drugs that are now in clinical trials include setrusumab, which is the anti-sclerostin antibody supported by Ultragenyx and Mereo, and this other anti-TGF-beta antibody with a very long number, which is being studied by Sanofi. And so I think that, again, we as a community want to see as many effective therapies get to market as possible, because first, it gives us an opportunity to customize treatment for patients. And second, the more drugs which are more in the market, not only is it better for patients, ultimately, hopefully, they will also impact the cost of the drugs and drive them down partially. So what's happening right now and going on into the future in terms of BBDC? Well, again, As I mentioned, we just activated our clear aligner trial. So please go to our website here or go to the OIF website. We are recruiting patients for this aligner trial for malocclusion in OI type 3 in Los Angeles, in Kansas City, and at the NIH in Bethesda. Dr. Storch is leading a very exciting study now entering the second year, of which I like to call the well-being study, which understands the psychosocial needs of individuals with OI across the lifespan. Dr. Raggio and others are focused on scoliosis and cardiopulmonary outcomes in adults with OI. Dr. Krakow is now trying to dive deep into an original observation from the BBDC that there was increased risk of bleeding in women who deliver with OI, and now she wants to understand this more detailed fashion. And then something in the planning stage is that Dr. Sutton and Kruger at our site in Chicago, they're planning to do a study of actigraphy or wearables in monitoring OI patients in their everyday life. You know, the current model is that you have to come to our centers to participate, and we appreciate everything you do, but it's a big burden on patients in moving forward. There are exciting studies from lots of researchers beyond the BBDC. I mentioned the anti-sclerostin antibody, which is primarily driven by both folks inside and outside of the BBDC. There's lots of new work on new genes causing increasingly rare forms of OI. And you know, while there are 20 plus types based on the number of genes, there really are going to be even more. There are many now new animal models beginning to do what we did with the TGF-beta in our models of OI to really study mechanism. And you have to continue to do that to be able to develop treatments specific for these new forms. And then increasingly, the BBDC, as well as other investigators around the world, are recognizing that OI truly is a systemic connective tissue disease, and that we need to really understand the heart, the lungs, osteoarthritis in OI, which we're beginning to focus on. We recently published on tendons and ligaments, but others are also doing this in disease, ocular and dental features. So really a lot of work going on. And let me end, let me just double check time, that on a topic which Tracy Hart had asked me to address. And I think this is very apt. One of the most exciting developments in research, not just in OI research, but research in general, is the idea of gene editing. And as you know, the Nobel Prize was given for something called CRISPR-Cas9, this part of this complex I'm showing here, which showed that one can use an RNA molecule, and you've heard about RNA molecules, like in COVID vaccines, but use that in combination of a protein, which has been found actually in bacteria, to actually direct a cut into double-stranded DNA in human cells. And that was the basis of a Nobel Prize. Why is that so important? Because of the ability to get to an address. You know, think of this like, you know, Google Maps. You can see how Google Maps has transformed all of our lives. Well, this is the Google Maps of molecular and human genetics and medicine. So that's why it deserved Nobel Prize. Now, in the past 2 to 3 years, building on this discovery, investigator David Liu developed what's called genome prime editing. And basically, he improved the system to make it even more powerful. Because what he was able to do was not just get the address and show you how to get there, but once you get there, he could actually change the street signs, the house, whatever you want in the location that you found. And so basically what that means is that using genome prime editing, we can change any DNA mutation to another variant. And basically what this means from a disease perspective is we can actually change a mutation that causes OI, for example, or any genetic disease back to normal, or actually eliminate that mutation if that mutation has an unwanted effect. So basically fix the mutation, which is the ultimate form of a cure. Now, in addition, this approach is also not just that it can happen, it's highly efficient. And what do I mean by this? Well, Google Maps is great, but it wouldn't be very useful if you can only do it effectively 1 in 100 addresses, right? What prime editing has shown is that when you get it into the cell, you got to get it into the cell, you got to get this machine into the cell, then it is effective in probably 60 or 80 or 90% of cases, which is absolutely amazing because in the past, this type of work occurred maybe at 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 in terms of efficiency. But You might say, well, why haven't we cured OI? Well, OI itself has many challenges. Unlike, and similar to many other genetic conditions, so this is not unique to OI, there are many individual mutations. So it's not just one address. Every patient has a different address. So it would, in theory, mean you would need to make a new drug for every patient. Now, what we hope is, because the system is generic, the FDA may one day allow approval of a class so that you don't necessarily need to test a new version in the same way we would in every patient. And in fact, the messenger RNA vaccine approach is similar to that, where as they change messenger RNA vaccines, we may or may not need to do large clinical trials with every type of messenger RNA version of the COVID vaccine, for example. However, the major challenge still is delivering this machinery to the right cell. And remember, in OI, as I just underscored for this whole past 15, 20 minutes, it's a systemic connective tissue disease, which means you have to hit many, many, many different cells. And that is an enormous challenge compared to, let's say, if you're treating something like sickle cell disease in blood. Now, that's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy, but at least there, you're targeting a very specific type of cell in the body, certain blood cells, not even all blood cells, certain types of blood cells, the cells that make red blood cells. Here again, we've got bone cells, many types of bone cells, tendon cells, cartilage cells, on, and it's throughout the body. So it is a challenge. And you have to deliver it to enough cells. If you have to deliver it to just 1 out of 1,000 cells to get an effect, well, that may be easy. But if you have to deliver the machinery to 80% of cells, can you imagine what the challenge might be in the body? And then for all diseases in any platform, you have to limit toxicity, because even though you can do it, it has to be done in a safe way. And so these are some of the challenges that are especially relevant, not just to other genetic diseases, but OI. And so with that, I want to thank all the different great investigators. I just happen to be lucky enough to represent them and support them and talk about all the great work that they're doing. And of course, thank you and the OI community for your support of research, because it truly has been the vision of the OIF in supporting research that I think is transforming the way we take care of patients today. Thank you.
Dr. Lee, thank you so much for that very interesting and really deep overview of the research landscape right now. Always so fascinating to hear that. So I want to invite people who are with us right now, if they would like to ask Dr. Lee some questions. We're going to do a quick moderated Q&A session right now for about 10 or 15 minutes. And then we're going to move on to our next speaker for this session. So we're going to try to answer at least a few questions we have from the audience now. We actually have some from registration. And so I know that you addressed some of these topics a bit in your talk, but I might ask you to elaborate a little bit further, because it was just so deep and so fast-paced. One is about, so you talked a little bit about, the research studies being done by the BBDC, or so the Brittle Bone Disease Consortium, and those being done just by other researchers as well. And do you have a rough idea of roughly like what a rough percentage of how much of that research is being focused around older patients with OI, and particularly adults, but also like beyond young adults?
Yeah, so first, thank you, Michael. I would first, if you think about the 300 or so papers that have been published in 2021, let's start with that. I don't have the exact data, but I'll give you a sort of a descriptive guesstimate. Many of those papers are going to be focused on what I call basic science or translational research. So that means cells, mice, fish, all different non-human models of OI. And that's very important, as I said. And my guess would be, and again, this is not, I haven't done the analysis. We could. It's an interesting question. My guess is probably at least 50% of those papers are in that domain. And maybe even a little bit more. And the reason for that is that's the nature of funding for many of our agencies. They fund primarily basic translational research, and that's an important component of our portfolio. I think the others would be focused on human studies and human subjects. Many of those are both in men, women, and children, and they're relatively small groups, experiences around 1, 5, 10, or subjects. What I would say is increasingly, the work that we're all doing is focused around adults because we recognize that OI, of course, is a lifetime disease. And also from the work of many individuals like Laura Toski, who's going to talk next, who's really very focused on adults and adult care, and also by you, our community. I would say that, at least a good quarter of them are describing the disease within the adult setting. Now, having said that, again, they may be on very few subjects, and that will always be a challenge. And this is where we hope the real deliverable of the BBDC is going to be a massive amount of data longitudinally on the adult groups, because over this period of 10 years, guess what? Many of the children have become adults, and the adults who are adults stay adults, obviously, we hope. And so, at the same time, I think there's going to be a real rush in the next few years of the sort of adult-focused research that's coming out.
Gotcha. Thank you. So some other questions we got from the Zoom registration. One is that actually, so you touched on it for a bit during your talk. Could you just elaborate a little bit further about the I always pronounce it wrong, the Faezulumab study, and are there any sort of big updates that people should be aware of about that moving forward?
Yeah, I think I covered it pretty well. The paper has come out, and I invite you to certainly take a look at it. It was key in terms of validating what we found in the mouse models in terms of in-human bone, so that's really important. And then, of course, showing the safety in the initial, 8 subjects, 8 adults that we studied. I think the key, of course, is now Sanofi has taken this on and moving it into clinical development. I think that's a very exciting finding because, as I discussed, our jobs as patient participants and academic researchers is to get to the proof of concept so that industry can take over. So I think that's the key finding there. I think that it will be interesting, and there have been some very nice papers coming out recently by others showing the increase in TGF-beta in different forms of OI, as well as showing also in animal models that it may not work as effectively in the more severe end of the spectrum. So I think another area of work, something we're very interested in, is can we increase the dose or maybe even begin to target TGF-beta to the bone to try to better get better safety and efficacy. So, the one thing about targeting signaling proteins like TGF-beta or sclerostin is that it's not unreasonable to think that different severity or forms of OI may require different doses. That's actually a logical statement, but very difficult to prove and test. But I think that may be, again, on the horizon, that the dose of any signaling targeted therapy may need to be modified depending upon the severity or type. It could be that when you have mild OI to use these medications, you actually need less, versus if you have a very severe form, you may need more. And this, again, is completely in line with what we know about signaling. It's kind of like for every signaling protein, too much is bad, too little is bad. And to make things even more complicated, that sweet spot may be different in different individuals.
Great, thank you so much. We had other questions. So I see quite a few questions coming into the chat, so I want to jump into some of those. One is asking, and actually we got a few questions about this also in registration as well. People are asking about, we have many types of OI right now. Some are obviously more of like a clinical presentation. Others are about attached to specific genes. Do treatments or drug treatments get sort of targeted at specific ones? Because I know in some of the studies you're highlighting, they talk about we are looking at types 1, 3, 4, and 5. And does that mean that those drug treatments are only going to be addressing those types of OI?
Yeah. So this is where it's important to appreciate that there's a difference in terms of the design of a clinical study versus when a drug is actually approved for use and the off-label use of that drug. So when we do clinical studies, we will often be very specific about the types and the target, partly because you want a defined population to measure a response, and this is often the case. Also, but at the end of the day, if a drug is shown effective, there will be certainly follow-on studies which may be used to target other types of OI. So I would say that that's the logical progression. Research studies oftentimes, especially in rare disease, start with very well-defined populations. This is what you call inclusion criteria in a research study. If there is efficacy and eventually approval or moving towards approval, what we will see as a next phase is studying in different individuals, different gene mutations, different types, to really learn more about those treatments. And eventually, they could be added to the label or just used in an off-label approach, which is oftentimes what happens. Bisphosphonates, for example, we all use off-label in OI. So that's certainly one approach. I think the other is that when there are unique forms caused by unique mutations, so for example, OI type 5, as some of you know, is not a mutation that's caused by a collagen or collagen machinery problem. It's actually in a very different protein. And it may be that that will have a very different mechanism where one would have to target with a totally different therapy. So there will be examples of that. And this is again why it's so important we continue our investments in basic research, because it's really only from there that's informed by observations in the clinic that we will be able to, in fact, do type-specific therapies.
Got it. Thank you. Moving along, we have a question here that someone's just wondering if the research into OI ligamentous laxity is leading to treatments. And thank you, Dr. Lee.
Yeah, so that's another exciting area. You know, this is relevant to adults. As we become more and more effective at treating bone, the other elements of OI that dramatically impact quality of life, especially across the lifespan as one becomes an adult and a mature adult, include things like joint function. And I think increasingly, and there have been some nice papers, in fact, I think from Europe that show this, and we have seen this now in our animal models, that you can get significant tendon and ligamentous dysfunction, so the things that attach bone to bone and muscle to bone, as well as cartilage dysfunction, and leading to osteoarthritis, which means a degradation of the cartilage that line the joint. And so that can lead to pain, it can lead to weakness, and it's not just bone. And we actually published 2 papers recently in OI models, one in the FKBP10 form of OI, the other in the CRTAP form of OI, where we show primarily an intrinsic defects in the tendons and ligaments, and that it is related to the matrix. And actually, we see what would be tendinopathies, and what looks like tendinopathies in the non-OI population, or the kind of injury you might get from a sports injury. Very similar processes. And so in that way, I'm increasingly really beginning to believe scientifically, I've always believed this without the data, but scientifically, that many of the things we see in OI is really a form of advanced and accelerated aging, whether it's the osteoporosis in bone or the tendon injury that we see over time. And that, of course, is relevant because it's time and environment. So as we live, we are injuring our tendons and bones continuously. It's just part of the stress we put on our body. And if our body is not able to respond, I think we accelerate some of the healing mechanisms. So for example, in one of the OI models, we showed that the tendons actually form cartilage, much like in tendinopathy, and that there was altered signaling, another signaling pathway called hedgehog, which leads to that ectopic chondrogenesis in tendons. So absolutely, there's a lot of research going on in this area. And again, and much like we did in the TGF-beta field in bone, I'm hoping that we, as well as other investigators, will identify targets, perhaps to treat the tendinopathy in OI.
Great, thank you. I want to move along because we only have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. This is a question actually that came up in the other session, but I figured actually you might be the more appropriate person to talk to. So you talked about the exciting ways in which CRISPR may be able to apply to OI in the near future. Another thing, and this is like a common question we get too, is like another research, I guess methodology is the right word I want to use, that you hear about is about stem cell research. And is there any way in which that could be applied to eventually helping people with OI?
Absolutely. And I get this question a lot. I am a big believer in stem cells because if you lose connective tissue, whether it's bone, cartilage, tendons, We can delay that loss, and that's partly what we're doing with the treatments that we're doing. But eventually you have to replace that tissue, and that's part of regenerative medicine. And really the only way to achieve regenerative medicine is with stem cells, right? It's to provide a cell that can produce a healthy tissue to, function in the place of the cartilage of bone, the tissue. And stem cell therapy, as I've often said to many people, has been around for decades. One of the most effective stem cell therapies that we use in medicine is bone marrow transplantation. That's a stem cell therapy. The challenge, and if you look back at the CRISPR slide that I had about the challenges of targeting a connective tissue with stem cells is the same, whether it's CRISPR or stem cells. If you take my analogy of the address and the neighborhood, well, think about how bone marrow transplants work effectively. We have to go into the neighborhood, ablate the neighborhood, basically get rid of all the houses and then put in the stem cells, and they replace all the houses. You can't do that with the human skeleton. And that's the major challenge of stem cell therapy in the skeleton. We can give healthy stem cells. That can be done easily. But the question is, can it integrate it into the neighborhood when you've got all these houses and all these people already living there? And so that is the inherent sort of conceptual challenge. And we don't know whether you only need to replace 5% of the houses or 10% or 80%. But you can imagine if you're trying to do stem cell therapy and you have to replace 80% of the houses, how hard would you need to get 80% of the people in a neighborhood to move out, get rid of their houses, and so you can rebuild 80% new houses, right?
Yeah.
Because what we can't do what we do in bone marrow transplantation, which is give chemotherapies and radiation to basically destroy the neighborhood, and then come in with stem cells to replace it. That's a conceptual challenge, and doesn't mean we shouldn't continue to work on the problem, because science is amazing when you put enough brain power behind it. I do think we can get there, but certainly it's not something I would say can be done in the next 1 to 2 years effectively because of that conceptually. But we have to do the experiment, and some of you know there is a trial in Europe trying to do stem cell therapy in utero, even in OI, and so it will be interesting to see some of the data in these sort of very early studies.
Interesting, and also because like the bones would still be forming. It's very interesting. Yeah, thank you. So this next question is slightly different, but we have somebody who wrote in saying, "Hey, I have OI and I just graduated with a degree in biomedical sciences. How can I be a part of research, and what do you recommend for OI literature?" So we want to get your career advice.
It's all of our jobs to train the next generation. So you tell that individual just to email me, and I'm happy to meet with them and give them some personal advice. But
Absolutely.
Certainly, obviously, the literature is easily accessible in PubMed, which is our national sort of archive for literature, and you can find all sorts of OI publications. I like PubMed as opposed to Google because PubMed is of the peer-reviewed literature. The challenge with Google is I use Google all the time, but anything can go onto Google searches, and you don't know whether it's been peer-reviewed. So it's important to look at peer-reviewed literature. Not to say that peer-reviewed literature is always correct. It may be off. That's the nature of science. But at least there's one quality control. I think the other question was, how do you get involved in terms of?
I think they were asking like what's the best way to get involved with research, and that's we can reach out to them and.
Yeah, you reach out to, any of our sites. We're so excited to have motivated young folks to join the effort. So that's easy.
Totally. Yeah, and that's definitely been one pleasure working at the OI Foundation is we love seeing all of the new investigators, the early career researchers looking into this topic because as Dr. Lee showed in the beginning of this presentation, that graph of number of research studies about OI is going almost straight up, and we are so happy about it. And Dr. Lee, we are so thankful for your leadership on this topic. I want to thank you again for speaking with us today, and we really appreciate you.
Pleasure.
Yeah. So with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to back to Ted, who's going to introduce our next talk for this session.
Thank you, Michael. Our next speaker is Director of Bone Health Program at Children's National Medical Center and Associate Professor of Orthopedics and Pediatrics at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. Her clinical practice focuses on the orthopedic care of children and young adults with physical disabilities or other issues related to bone health. She has recently served on the board of directors for the OI Foundation, where she led the grant work and continues to lead the grant work for Patient-Centered Outcomes Reporting, or PCOR. She also serves on the OIF Medical Advisory Council. Please welcome Dr. Laura Tosi.
Thanks so much, Ted. On a personal wonderfulness, I finally made it to professor about a week and a half ago. Took a long time, but I'm there. So I'm tickled to share that. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Looks great. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Congratulations again.
Took a long time. Anyway, so first, a little bit about our title, and for which we owe a lot to Michelle Dupre, who pointed out that we needed to talk about purpose. So I'm going to talk about patient-centered outcomes research in OI, and what Michelle put in, where researchers and community members connect for a better OI life. And that is where this effort has gone. And what I'm going to do is summarize what we've done. You'll recognize a few of the slides as I bring everybody up to date about the past, and then I'll really work on emphasizing our current activities, which I hope you'll be excited about. So, as has been emphasized tremendously, OI is just an amazing disorder. It's rapidly changing, and for someone who's taken care of kids with OI for almost 40 years, I can't begin to tell you how exciting it is to be able to give far better prognostic information to families when their children are diagnosed. Bisphosphonates and rotting have been incredible. Now we are becoming concerned about pulmonary issues. And as you just heard, there are new medications coming down the path. So the issue has become, what are the most important questions for the community? And how do we involve the committee so that we help prioritize? So we were very lucky. And now over 3 years ago, we launched our first program, fancy name, Improving Patient-Centered Outcomes, Expanding Engagement, et cetera, et cetera. But this was our opportunity to start talking to the OI community about being more involved on a day-to-day basis in identifying questions, answering questions. And the key thing was emphasizing a new perspective. Traditionally, most research has been more basic science oriented, and it's been a one-way street that the scientists came up with the questions, came up with the answers. And the beauty about PCOR is, no, we need to have it a two-way street to see what the community wants to know, needs to know, and start to deal with that. So we now in 2019, we're so excited about this award, and we started giving lectures and teaching sessions and all kinds of little activities about PCOR, when suddenly our world fell apart. The scientific meeting was canceled, life was canceled, and I, for one, was sent home when the pandemic hit. This led the foundation to really step up and rethink everything it did. And we were very lucky. We got a COVID supplement. And with this, frankly, mostly Tracy and her team, and with me cheering, moved forward to really expand everything that the foundation did and does. And I hope you were part of our community calls. I hope you took advantage of our COVID toolkit. I hope you joined the registry if you weren't part of it already, so that we could start tracking evolving issues. And we particularly tried to respond to the frequent complaint, well, I participated in this or that study, and then I never found out what happened. So we started publishing what we did in Breakthrough so that everyone would have access. It's a little bit fun to look back. So our second COVID survey was, again, primarily, or average age, adult, 46 and a half years old. So we definitely had the adult opinion in here. At that point, only 14% of respondents thought that they had had COVID, but we were particularly concerned about the fact that if people had COVID, they were more likely than average to have long COVID symptoms. It's hard to remember back that far, but we were excited because 34% of respondents had gotten the vaccine. I don't know about you, but I've already been boosted twice. Spring 21 was only a little over a year ago, but so much has changed in our lives. It was interesting to see by the survey we just did this spring that 31% of respondents felt they had had COVID. Big jump, but we are so relieved that we did not find, and of course we'll never fully know, but we did not find significant reports of morbidity. By now, by spring, 84% of our respondents said they were fully vaccinated, huge jump, and 68% of our respondents had already had a booster. One of the really important findings I felt was, if you look at the bottom of this little pictorial, that when we looked at our vaccinated patients, community members, only one person had to be hospitalized. Certainly, a significant portion, the dark green, had moderate symptoms, but only one person had been hospitalized. Whereas among our unvaccinated respondents, 9 individuals had to be hospitalized. So really, this significantly underscored our campaign to try to have everyone who was willing to become vaccinated. We remain concerned and will continue to push physical activity, which is so important for health and wellness, because we still are at a terrible number that 36% of respondents feel they're less active than they were from before the pandemic. On a positive note, we've got positive reports, and many respondents came up with really lovely things. More time spent with family. They enjoyed working at home. New and different social interactions. Some people actually had more time to exercise and also meditate, and lots of new hobbies. So keeping track, but I think this speaks to the resilience of our community. We've really enjoyed getting these awards, and we were very fortunate then to get a new award in which we started to involve the rest of the rare bone disease community. As you may or may not know, there are estimated to be just under 500 different rare bone disorders. But the fact of the matter is that if you just look at numbers of patients, OI is by far the largest rare bone disease out there. For many years, people thought it was achondroplasia or dwarfism, one of the forms of dwarfism. But in fact, as we've come to appreciate, particularly type 1 OI, we understand that there are many, many individuals out there with OI that I think early epidemiologists did not include. So we're the big gun. And one of the great things OI Foundation has done is support something called the Rare Bone Disease Alliance. And we currently have 15 members, member organizations, and now we're really talking about probably most of the folks with rare bone disease, because so many of the other rare bone diseases just have, very, very few individuals. And Tracy and her team has done huge numbers of projects to support this community. And we started to explore their interest in patient-centered outcomes research. And one of the fun findings was they were all busy doing patient-centered outcomes research. They just didn't have the right title to put on it. But it gave us an opportunity to recognize that by sharing with these other disorders, we may have new opportunities to enhance care for everyone with a rare disease. Potentially centers that specialize in rare bone disease, not just a specific disorder, can help lift all the boats and help get better care. So we are looking with great interest in what some of the new opportunities for advocacy, research, and education can be by partnering with these individuals or organizations. Now, the big news from my standpoint, and what I really want to tell you about, is our newest project. And this is specifically focused on transition and access to quality adult care. Because as we've done this patient-centered outcomes research, the message has been loud and clear. We need to pay more attention to the transition process and access to quality adult care. And really, we have to fess up to the fact that there's a huge lack of that care. And the question is, what can we do to help? So we were thrilled. PCORI continues to like us, and they gave us a new award. It's got a fancy name that's in PCOR language, but basically it focuses on two issues: improving transition for our young adults, and again, ensuring access to high quality care for all OI adults. So our first aim is to talk to every single person who's willing to talk to us, because this is really a new frontier for us. We need to talk to the patients. We need to talk to caregivers, people who are delivering care, other organizations. Adult care is becoming a national issue, and no one has a good solution. But this is a time when the numbers of individuals who we call adults with childhood onset disorders is exploding, and creative ideas are necessary. So to everyone on this call, you are invited, you are begged to participate in this project. Our goal is to have listening sessions, 5, maximum 6 people at a time, to brainstorm about what needs to be done. What are the gaps? What are the opportunities? What does the community want, need? Should we focus on centers of excellence? But then sometimes getting there can be really difficult. Is the community open to the idea of peer coordinators? Significant privacy issues here, but sometimes affordable and much more easy to initiate. What is the potential role for telemedicine? Pre-COVID, the government was very, very restrictive, and frankly still is. I can only provide telemedicine in the states that I am licensed in. But there are a number of pieces of legislature that are moving forward to try to redefine how we do telemedicine. How could this impact that access issue? And of course, what can the foundation do? The foundation is rich in volunteers, but no one has the financial well-being to set up a whole new health system. Should it train coordinators? Should it give fellowships to practitioners who want to learn more about delivering better care? Should we develop standards of care? That's been a tool used by a number of rare disorders so that patients have a document to walk in with when they go to see their doctors. Not just a checklist, these are the things you need to look at, but these are the tests you need to do. These are the things you need to monitor. That's not an inexpensive goal at all. So something that we really have to have out on the table. Our plan, and we want to be doing these interviews over the next 6 months, is to create a possible strategic plan for the foundation that capitalizes on what we find. And then, frankly, to raise additional monies to try it out and to work with the community to develop a method to evaluate whether this plan is really working. Are people noticing and experiencing smoother transitions, better access, better quality, and certainly better informed clinicians? So this is not an easy undertaking. We need lots of creative ideas. And we can't just look at sort of meeting today's problems. We really have to look to the future. And so this is not going to be easy. So I always say, what do the next 50 years or more look like? And there won't be immediate answers, but we need a plan. We need to invest, just like a 401k, in the things that the foundation really can do that will make a difference. So please let your voice be heard. And if you're interested in joining us in this project, which I hope you will be, it's talked about on our website, or please feel free to reach out to Stacy Loring, either on email or have a conversation with her. But there is a role, there is a need for everyone to participate. So what is our ask going forward? Learn about what we're doing, for goodness sakes. There are articles about this in Breakthrough on our website, or talk to us in person. Please sign up for the OI Patient Registry, because that's our best method for communicating directly with individuals. Please sign up and participate in our newest project. I think it's going to have the biggest impact of everything we've done today, because this is your opportunity to tell us what you want to know about. What do we need to find out for you? So your voice, everyone's voice matters. This is one of my favorite foundation slides. Whoops. There's room for everyone. So thank you. I love this recruiting poster. Are you doing all you can? And I hope that you'll decide that joining us in this next endeavor is what you want to do next. Thanks so much for your time.
Dr. Tosi, thank you so much. As always, it's great to hear from you, and it's great to hear about this specific research initiative. So I want to invite everyone again. So we have a few minutes left in today's session. If you have any questions for Dr. Tosi or for Dr. Lee, please feel free to put them into the chat. Actually, we have one question already in the chat about how much time commitment is required for these, we're calling them listening sessions.
Right. We envision 90 minutes.
Okay.
We're not looking, for hours and hours. We want, that's why we want to keep the session small, capture everyone's ideas, and we plan to plot them all and take advantage of them all.
Absolutely. So for those chat sessions, can I ask, and I can elaborate on this as well, what types of questions get asked in those sessions?
So we have a script,
Mhm.
but the script is only there to gently prod you. We really want your identification of what you see are the problems in the system. And we want you to dare to dream. What would a better system offer? And recognizing again that the OI Foundation has yet to win the lottery. We need to know what you think are where you would want to go. And as I alluded to earlier, some disease groups have actually chosen patient coordinators, or that's really that members of the community would help, so that they are geographically located, know what's happening in this area or that area, to help you find, I don't want to say better providers, but perhaps providers that you would want to work with, help you navigate the ever-challenging healthcare system.
Mm-hmm.
And the issue is always, how much privacy are you willing to give up? And that's not a joke for a lot of people. So thinking about what you really need, what you really want, and telling us about it is really important as we search for common denominators.
Absolutely. And I can just add on top about that note of privacy. So if anyone is on this call and thinking about, oh, this sounds really fascinating, but I'm a little bit worried about talking about sharing some of my personal story or personal, some of my past with a group of strangers that then will get put into a large collective study. I just want to let people know that so we have pretty strict procedures around protecting your privacy as participants in listening sessions with us. So we keep that basically siloed off, any personal identifying information, siloed off from everyone else involved in the study. This is for the people facilitating those sessions, so that there's no communication and no identifiable information. Just wanted to clarify that if anyone's thinking about joining us, we would love to have you. And I see that some of my colleagues have put that into the chat as well. Do we have any other questions from the group about some of these patient-centered outcomes research initiatives that Dr. Tosi has been talking about?
I want to speak to Lorraine Russo's comment.
Mm-hmm.
Are we looking at how to communicate our needs to ER personnel and ambulance personnel to prevent further injury? I would make 2 points. One, that is not the initial goal of this particular project, but it certainly is, shall I call it a subset? How do we make it possible for you to communicate a lot of information fast to caregivers is important. And, there's all kinds of out there dreams, a credit card type device that has your old x-rays on it, your medication list, your key previous surgeries, is one of the inventions that's out there that hasn't gotten very far, but certainly would be helpful in an emergency room. Is there something we can do to help push that technology? Don't know. No matter what kind of packet. I don't know about you, but I have weird allergies. And so I can never remember the names of them. They're so weird. So I always keep a 3x5 in my wallet that has a list of those allergies, because they actually have huge implications if I ever needed emergency anesthesia. What are the tricks that we can develop and then share?
Great. I see another question here. Can people participate who live outside of the US?
The answer is we're interested in everyone's opinion. Dr.
Tosi, hold on one second. We are not hearing you. Can you?
Oh.
Oh, I hear you there. I don't know if maybe if there's something covering your microphone.
I may have done it.
Okay.
Sorry.
No problem.
So just like the registry, we are interested in everyone's opinion because you never know where a good idea is going to come from. The Irish system is far more socialized than ours. So significant aspects of access to care have already been covered for our community. Here's an interesting question. Thank you, Michael. He didn't know if we had covered this before, but do we recommend medical bracelets? I always urge my patients to wear medic alert bracelets because you don't know when an injury is going to happen, and you don't know when or whether you're going to be able to communicate your needs. And as a clinician, boy, do I appreciate finding those. I did years of ER care as a resident, and yet loved them. Big time saver. Be amazed at how many people arrive in an ER unattended. Great question.
Absolutely. For those of you who are still with us now, I want to just remind people, so the next session for today's virtual conference will be at 2 p.m. Eastern Time on the East Coast of the US. We'll be doing an Ask the Expert session. We'll have many different breakout groups. So if you still have questions, that is a fantastic session to bring your questions to, and we will just be giving you more information there. With that being said, thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you later on today. Dr. Tosi, again, thank you so much. And to Dr. Lee and to Ted, we appreciate your leadership. We benefit so much from it, so thank you all.